Well, today I want to talk about why the order of your effects matters a lot, how to take advantage of some features built in Reaper, and how to work a little bit faster for different stages of your music making process. So, straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and today I did this example. I think it's a little bit hard to approach this subject, so I want to ask a little bit of your patience today. The whole idea is I'm trying to make different processing for the drums, but you can't think of an instrument on its own, just on its own, because it's always within a context and it's always relating to another instruments. So for example, I have these keys. I tend to freeze my tracks, for example, using this action most of the time: freeze to stereo, render pre-fader, save, remove items, and online effects. And that lets me only have the audio, but if I ever want to go back and change anything, I can just unfreeze the track. I'll show you how to modify your menus on different videos. You can also go to another video that I did regarding Sense, and I'll link it in the description. This way, I have a fader free to use, and I have all of my effects. And the bass sound is this. And I'm constantly thinking about the size of the instruments. I even remember long ago when I was at audio engineering school that this was something that really kept coming on and off in my mind of why things were fitting or were not fitting inside a mix or a production. It matters how you arrange your music using the octaves for different instruments. Sometimes they shouldn't overlap as much, but because of the processing that you do to every single instrument, you might end up having a lot more high-end, a little bit more of lower mids, or you will have different sizes of your instruments across time, not only because of the notes that you're playing, and if they're eighth notes, quarter notes, but because you're adding reverb or you're adding delay. So this leaves more or less space for the rest of your instruments when you're trying to do music. So if I just look at the size of my drums, it's very clear how much space they are using. I don't have to worry too much about them. And remember that the shorter the sound, there's a small time lapse where the brain starts averaging the sound itself, so it decides if it's loud or is it soft, and that's 200 milliseconds. Most of the drums, most of the percussion instruments won't be longer than 200 milliseconds. So for your percussions, most of the times to cut through, they have to be shorter, and that will also help with the perception of how loud they are. And it's easier to just balance them out with a fader. I always miss the physical fader. That's why I always do this gesture. So if I listen to my drums, and there's some sort of processing that I always do. For example, I'm doing some saturation, maybe I'm adding some golfos, maybe I'm doing some EQ, maybe I'm doing some compression or limiting. In Reaper, if you hit the FX button, you will see this FX window. I don't use it as much because I feel it's really slow to move between plugins like this. I like to open them one by one and just rearrange them on my screen as necessary. But there's one big benefit of going into this FX window. If I go up here into the FX, I can save this as an FX chain. And I still have to reorganize a lot of it. You always have to spend time reorganizing this because it will get you faster and better results. First, explore a lot, save different chains, and then go through them and just figure out what you want to keep, what you don't want to keep, and more or less organize it, like make it tidy. If I sound strange, for some reason I got the hiccups at the beginning of the video, so I hate it, but let's keep going. So for example, this drum processing, since this is stored inside of my computer, I can hit Command, Shift, and N to create a new folder and create a bus folder. And inside of this, I will name this bus drums. And I will add probably just acoustic, some sort of naming that reminds me really what's the sound in this. So anytime I go into a new session, for example, holding Command plus Option plus N, I can just add an FX chain, go into Boss, and open Boss Drum Acoustic, and it's loaded. There we go. I like to save these chains offline because some of the plugins eventually might crash because of system updates or plugin updates or whatever reason. I like to save the chains bypassed because whenever you load them again on a new project months later or years later, some of those plugins, because of an update of your system or your computer or anything, might crash the session. So I like to load them bypassed and then set them on by holding Shift and left clicking every single one of them. And remember that you can also just hit this FX enable button, so you can just turn all of them on or all of them off. In my case, I'm using toggle FX bypass for selected tracks. And remember that all of these actions will be in the description if you missed one. I can navigate to my previous project by hitting Ctrl and Tab, so I can switch to next project tab, or I can switch to previous project tab. So I'm using Addictive Drums here. I have also made a video on how to set up the multi-channel out for any multi-out plugin. The concept being that whatever plugin you're using, up here in the pin connector, it will show you how many outs available it has. And you just add it right here. If it's not one of these numbers, you set it up by hand. And you have to pay attention to the outs that are named by the developers themselves, or check the manual for how is it routing out. From my kick to my flex C3, they are all mono tracks according to the manual. And my overheads, my rooms, and my bus processing, they are all stereo. And of course, the master of the plugin itself. In the case of Addictive Drums, you can just click right here, route all channels, separate out pause fader plus master. So whatever you're doing here will be reflected on the routing for the last touch tracked. So here I have created one send. And the fastest way to do that is you just create one instrument, you create the receiving track for the multi-out instrument, you click and drag, and that creates one send. You duplicate this track as many outs as you need. For example, let's say 4. You might want to name this kick, snare, hi-hat, overhead. You can again open the routing window and disable the master send, or hold Option and left click these 3 little icons. Remember that blue is the parent send or the master send. The second one, orange, is that the track has a send, and that the red one is that the track is receiving something. I have them all set post fader, so I can manage the send of all of the tracks a little bit from this fader. So I can just send -9 because I know most plugins come really hard, close to 0. And using again this routing window, I can just change one by one. And I know that in the case of Addictive Drums, the kick starts on number 3. So I did all of that routing already. My master is 1, 2, my kick is 3, my snare is 4, and so forth. There's an action on the RIA pack for this, but I feel it's a little bit clunky. So my best suggestion is just do it by hand once. Select all of your tracks, download this one from the RIA pack, and create a folder to contain selected tracks. In my case, I'm naming it auxiliary drum. And now I can collapse it in my mixer, and I don't need to see as many tracks. And I can always do some small adjustments from the track control panel. From here on, I created 2 new tracks, disabling the master send from the auxiliary drums, so I can compare this FX chain against this FX chain, where I have true iron, my saturation on the second slot and my saturation on the first slot, adding some suppression before the saturation or suppressing after the saturation. If you look at different videos on the internet, you will see that this also happens a lot on vocals, where people compress and then do de-essing, and you do get different sounds out of this. And it really depends on the material. So I really don't think looking for a standard way of working for every single situation works. Really listening to the material before making any decisions. And again, since I'm recording and this is really CPU heavy, I just printed out both of the tracks by using the render tracks to stereo stem tracks and mute originals. That way I have this track muted but available, and I can just hide it and look for it on the track manager if necessary. And the problem when trying to make comparisons is that you have to level match and match the volume of the audio example. So try to do one thing at a time. and how to be able to switch from one send to another without having to hear unnecessary clicks. So what I'm doing here is I'm using set solos and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I have that available on my keyboard. That way, when I hit that action, I can just switch and I don't hear any jumps. So if I unmute the originals, mute the frozen tracks, change the solo from one to another, there's no clicks. There's no clicks, and that's super useful. How I started building the chain is I first set up only these two, and I want you to try and really listen to the differences. Remember that the solo action works for the last track touched, so you have to have this track selected so you can do the switching. So what's the difference between this sound? I'll give you 2 bars of each. And this one. Again, without me talking. Were those balloons? How did that happen? That's super strange. What differences do you listen? I'll play it again. Since saturation is really related to compression and it reacts differently in a non-linear way, I think that you can concentrate on different parts of the sound time-wise. This is a different way of trying to listen to stuff. You can concentrate only on the transients, but concentrate only on the transients for this first listening. Only on the transients. Is it clickier? Does it have a lot more high frequency or less high frequencies? Now, I want you to concentrate on the sound of the overheads and more than that, the room, because that's a release of the dynamic reaction of saturation. Concentrate on the tails of the sound, the snare and the cymbal, the snare on like the roomy sound. Now we are going to cheat a little bit. We're going to use a spectrogram to confirm what we were listening. Okay, so concentrate again on the transients and listen for the high end. The good thing here is that I can just duplicate my metering and I can just measure both of them at the same time and look for differences and look for similarities and start A-Bing one and the other and try to find what's going on where. So were your suspicions correct? Like, does what you listen match what you see? If your room is not the best or your monitoring system is not the best, it's probably harder to get accurate listening results. If not, you can probably get a lot closer without measurements and graphs and drawings on your screen. And remember that most of the time, all of your decisions shouldn't be made completely based on what your eyes are seeing, because that tricks your brain and that tricks your ear, because sensory-wise, your seeing is much more important for the brain's survival skills. So try to listen, try to remove a lot of the measurements, a lot of the metering of the screen, until you want to confirm something. So one of the things that I actually can see is that I hear this second version with a lot more high end, and I can see it right here. The snares have a lot more energy, and also the kick drum is a little bit punchier. Even though my fader is a little bit down, don't worry, I level matched the examples during the post-editing of this video, but I can see and I can listen to those differences. If I really push the hi-hat, I could really see those results. So I know I was using like a really fancy spectrogram, but you can use the spectrogram meter that you can also download from the RIA pack for free. And I would adjust it more or less like this as I have it down below. You can just take a screenshot and copy those parameters and save that as your preset default. That's the easiest way for me to do it. Probably one of the benefits of saving it and using the stock one is that you can just right click on the plugin and you can show the embedded UI on the mixer control panel if you like the mixer control panel, and you can have that extra information right there. You might want to adjust a couple of parameters so you have the actual information that you want. And there are a couple of other metering free plugins that can do multi-channel, like the Saike Spectral Analyzer, where I'm sending one of my examples from into the 1-2 of this track and the second version into the 3 and 4 of this track. Because this plugin has multi-metering. That means I can compare my first version in orange against my second version in purple. If I want some fast reaction so I can look at the transients, I want to set up the timing fast because I'm looking for transient information. But if I want to average it a little bit more, it could be best to go into some integrated longer time, like 3 seconds. So I can see that, yes, one does contain a little bit higher end average, but not necessarily on the transient. So you have to learn how to listen on different parts of the spectrum. And this is what matters the most when you're trying to set up the chain of any instrument. It's, yes, of course, it's a feel for the music and what is the plugin doing for the instrument, but listening requires you to understand how to separate sound sources in different ways and compare them really fast with nothing but fader or turning something off and bringing it back in, or bringing it down and then bringing it up again, or up and then down. And we have a ton of ways to try and compare what we're listening to when we are doing two processes in just an inverted order. And of course, this plugin, I really recommend that you start checking it out, because you can get also this spectrogram version under. You can also compare the transients itself. You can compare the transients and you can resize this. So it's a lot easier to see what's going on. And you can see the transients of the first version against the second version. And probably this is one of the most helpful tools, completely available for free. And you can turn off the channels using this bottom part right here. That seems super useful to me. And of course, we have to talk about probably the most obvious thing right here. So on the left side of the screen, it's my first version, and on the right side of the screen is my second version. And of course, the parameters aren't exactly the same. I want to push them so I sometimes know what's actually going on. If you look at my saturation on Casrock, it's pretty much the same, because I want to know how does the Casrock reacts to different amounts of suppression. And that's what I'm trying to listen to. And that's how I got to different sounds. And I really encourage you to try this. Try pushing really up the resonance control, either de-essing or doing some multiband controlling with the Nova TDR that I have a really long video, and it's probably one of the most seen videos on my channel, and I will link it in the description. And it brings me to different results, but I always get to some result. Sometimes you might want to go and make a commitment with going down one path, getting the best out of it, and then going up through a different path, getting the best out of it, and then comparing them. And remember that in Reaper, we can use the action normalize items, peak RMS, LUFS, and this is something I do a lot. So whenever you have two audios and you have two MIDI items and you have two media items, you can just hit that normalize. And I suggest that you might try something like momentary loops. And I suggest that you might want to try around -21, because that will give you enough headroom so you can push the level if you need it, but it won't clip super fast. And I know about 32-bit float. I don't care about it. It's just a suggestion so you have your levels clean and you have ways to go up and down when necessary. After doing that, what I started doing was thinking about, they don't both fit in the screen, thinking about if and how much EQ they might need, feel better the spaces against my chords and my bass. And I did some different movements. I decided to try a mid-side EQ. It worked for whatever I was trying. So once I get a result from different orders, I can probably run into the rest of my chain using the same order of maybe EQ and extra compression or limiting, so I can add punch, control a little bit more something, or whatever I feel I might be missing. And I'm just using the 609 by Arturia. That's a great compressor. I love it. And as you can see, again, the parameters are a little bit slightly off from one another. And even though this threshold looks really low, it's not compressing as much as you might think. Same thing with the limiter built in. I'm driving it down because I want some extra distortion from this section sometimes, and I want this to control my transients and my envelopes of the drums. So I'm doing a multi-stage control of the sound itself. And for me, the most important thing here is the result itself. So I want you to listen to version 1 in this like purple lavender color, how it starts changing from the original sound and how I end up with the last version of it. First alone and then against the rest of the instruments, so it really falls where it should be. Okay, so Golfos, saturation, EQ, compression, now the version 2. First the sound again, without processing. Saturation. Suppression. EQ. Compression and limiting. So version 1, only suppression and saturation. Version 2. Version 1, adding EQ. Version 2. Adding compression and limiting, version 1. Version 2. Play that part of the video back as many times as necessary, and I hope you can really listen to the differences between them. And now, against the music. I have it more or less balanced, but this should work. Version 1. Version 2. The playback is stopping because I'm also using this action to toggle stop playback at end of loop if repeat is disabled. And I have this set up on my custom toolbar, and I have a video on how to make your custom toolbar. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. If the fader is not really getting the balance out of it, just freeze the tracks, flatten them, normalize the media items, and then try to figure out how much you have to push the fader, because now the sound source is at the exactly same volume. And that removes one of the stages, so we make a little bit less of a mistake when we try. Whatever chain you like the most, just remember that you can again go into the FX chain window and save it as an FX chain. So I can save this as bass processing, bass drum, acoustic, blah, 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 blah. Remember that I like to save my chains with everything bypassed. That way it's not way too heavy on my CPU if the chain is a little bit longer or the session is already big enough, and that removes a little bit of the strain on my CPU, and then I can turn them on one by one. You don't have to keep them in this order, and I wouldn't save two versions of it, one in one order and one in the other, because again, it really depends on your sound source. So if you're trying to mix for a client or for clients, you need to be able to adapt to different sources that will arrive to your studio. But if you're trying to only make your own songs with your own sounds, it's probably best to try and find one way that it more or less works. Try a couple of versions of it and save presets of everything. So for example, I could save this one as save preset as suppression before saturation, something like that, whatever it is. And whenever you're loading into a new session, you can right click before loading and you can add with a preset loaded in mind, or you can just use your default and start adjusting from there. There are a ton of fine tunings that we can do using this. Sometimes I like to do it more visually, especially when teaching in different tracks, because I feel it's easier to visualize what's going on. But if you don't want to go that way, remember we also have the paranormal FX router, and you can set up parallel FX and you can build two different chains, more or less level them out, and you don't have to see more tracks down here. That also works. Whatever works for you, that's what you should be more or less pursuing so you can get better sound out of anything you're working with or on. I hope this video has been a little bit useful for you. I really believe on training our listening skills. It's something that I've been doing for a while now. And I hope this entices you, or this is interesting enough for you to take some time and try to improve your listening skill and your listening habits. I never listen too loud because most of the time I have to take a lot of critical decisions. And if my ears get tired, then I probably will end up doing the wrong movements during sessions that might last for hours, because I usually work with clients and I can also get used to the sound of whatever I'm working with really fast. So I have to pay attention to how am I feeling, what am I listening for, what's my listening mode, where am I trying to get to. It doesn't have to be a final objective. Sometimes I'm just exploring what kind of sound is coming out of a different processing chain. Maybe I'm just following different videos and making chains that more or less match the videos, even if I don't have the plugins. And I try to get the sound out of that chain of whatever I have to work with. And that really improved the way I started using my plugins and making small and critical decisions during all of my workflow. If you like this kind of videos, I have a Buy Me a Coffee link down below. I really appreciate any kind of support that you can bring to the channel, such as a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share, leave a comment, or anything that you think of. And always invest a little bit of time on comparing what your plugins are doing. Straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and thanks for listening.